Keanu Reeves was a man who carried the world's love like a quiet burden. At 59, he was Hollywood's unlikely saint. A star who donated millions to children's hospitals, slipped cash to struggling crew members, and moved through life with a humility that made him seem more like a wandering philosopher than a global icon. His films, The Matrix, John Wick, had redefined cinema, but it was his kindness that made him a legend. Yet, beneath the adoration, Keanu harbored a secret that gnawed at his soul like a slow poison. For 30 years, a single name had been etched into his heart, a name no camera ever captured, no interview ever dared to probe: Sandra Bullock. She was the love he'd never claimed, the regret that shadowed every step of his life. On a rainy October evening in 2025, Keanu sat alone in his modest Hollywood Hills home, a sanctuary of simplicity far removed from the opulence of his peers. The house was a reflection of his soul, sparse, with books stacked haphazardly on shelves, a worn leather jacket slung over a chair, and a motorcycle helmet resting on a coffee table scarred by years of use. Rain streaked the windows, casting shadows across a faded photograph he held in trembling hands. It was from 1994, a candid from the set of Speed. Sandra, her warm brown hair catching the sunlight, laughed at something he'd said, her smile so unguarded it made his chest ache even now. Their chemistry had been a living thing, a spark so real it had terrified them both. But fear had won, and they'd chosen the safety of friendship over the risk of love, a decision that had carved a hollow space in Keanu's heart for 3 decades. "I've been honest with everyone except you," he murmured, tracing her face in the photo. The memory of those months filming Speed was a vivid reel in his mind. The set had been a crucible, grueling shoots, high-stakes action, and a camaraderie that made every day electric. But it was the quiet moments with Sandra that defined it. They'd linger in his trailer after hours, sharing coffee and stories under the Los Angeles stars. She'd tease him about his earnestness, calling him the philosopher action star. And he'd lose himself in her laugh, a sound that could pull him from the darkest corners of his mind. One night, between takes, they'd sat on a prop bus seat, the set quiet except for the hum of distant generators. Sandra had looked at him, her eyes soft, and said, "You make this feel real, Keanu. Too real." He'd wanted to kiss her, to tell her he felt it too, but fear had choked him. Instead, he'd smiled and changed the subject, cementing the lie that would haunt them for decades. Those months had been a whirlwind of connection, but one memory stood out sharper than the rest. During a break in filming, they'd slipped away to a diner near the set, a greasy spoon with flickering neon lights and a jukebox playing old Motown hits. Over milkshakes, Sandra had opened up about her dreams. Not just of stardom, but of a life filled with love, a family, a home with a garden where she could grow roses. "I want a place where I can be myself," she'd said, her voice soft but fervent. No cameras, no scripts, just real. Keanu had listened, captivated, imagining himself in that life with her. He'd almost told her then, almost confessed that he saw the same future, but the weight of their rising careers and the industry's relentless scrutiny held him back. Instead, he'd said, "You'll have that, Sandy. You deserve it." The words had felt hollow even as he spoke them. The phone rang, shattering the silence of his reverie. It was Marcus, his agent, his voice tight with urgency. "Keanu, we've got a problem. Vanessa Morrison from CNN wants an exclusive interview. She's got something on you. Photos from the Speed set, private moments. She's talking about a love story you've kept hidden." She mentioned Sandra Bullock. Keanu's blood ran cold. Vanessa Morrison was a journalistic predator, known for dismantling celebrities with surgical precision. If she had those photos, she knew the truth, or at least enough to unravel the facade he and Sandra had built over 30 years. "What exactly does she know?" Keanu asked, his voice betraying a rare edge of panic. "She's got behind-the-scenes shots, Keanu. Moments that never went public. And statements from crew members who worked on Speed. She's got Jan de Bont, the director, saying the chemistry was so intense he had to keep calling cut because you two forgot you were acting. She even mentioned Ellen Carter, the script supervisor, who said you and Sandra would disappear together during breaks. Vanessa's hinting at the great love you denied. I don't know how deep this goes, but she's not bluffing." Keanu's gaze drifted back to the photograph. Sandra's smile seemed to mock him now, a reminder of what he'd let slip away. For years, they'd maintained the narrative of friendship. Public appearances carefully choreographed, conversations kept light, smiles just bright enough to hide the pain. But Vanessa had pierced that veil. Ellen Carter's name hit him hard. Ellen had been their confidant on the speed set, a quiet observer who'd seen the truth in their glances. She'd once pulled Keanu aside, her voice gentle but firm. "You're both dancing around something real," she'd said. "Don't let fear steal it from you." He hadn't listened, and now Ellen's words were in Vanessa's hands. "Accept the interview," Keanu said after a long silence, his voice resolute. "It's time." Marcus hesitated. "Keanu, this could destroy you. Both of you. Sandra's built a life, a career. This could drag her into a scandal she didn't ask for. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Keanu replied, his eyes fixed on the photo. "I can't keep running from this." As he hung up, Keanu's mind raced back to 1994. The speed set had been a pressure cooker, but it was also a kind of magic. He and Sandra had clicked instantly, their banter effortless, their connection undeniable. Between takes, they'd steal moments, a shared glance during a stunt rehearsal, a quiet laugh over a bad take. One afternoon, during a rare day off, they'd driven to a secluded beach in Malibu, just the two of them, at Ellen's urging. "You two need to talk," she'd said, her eyes knowing. They'd walked along the shore, the waves crashing softly, and Sandra had opened up about her fears, about fame, about losing herself to Hollywood's machine. Keanu had shared his own struggles, his grief over personal losses, his fear of never being enough. For a moment, they'd been unguarded, their hands brushing as they walked, their laughter mingling with the sea breeze. It was the closest they'd come to admitting the truth, but neither had crossed the line. The night of the speed rap party had been the breaking point. They'd slipped away from the crowd, walking along the Santa Monica beach under a moonlit sky. The air was thick with unspoken words. Sandra had stopped, her bare feet sinking into the sand, and looked at him with eyes that held a question she was too afraid to ask. "Keanu," she'd said, her voice trembling, "I think I'm falling for you, and it scares me to death because I don't want to lose you as a friend." His heart had pounded, every fiber of him screaming to pull her close, to tell her he was already hers. But instead, he'd said, "Sandy, our friendship means too much. We can't risk it." The lie had tasted like ash, and the hurt in her eyes had seared itself into his soul. They'd walked back to the party in silence, and the next day, they began the slow, painful dance of pretending nothing had changed. The years that followed were a blur of success and heartbreak. Keanu threw himself into his roles, each one a desperate attempt to outrun his regret. The Matrix made him an icon, John Wick a legend, but no amount of fame could fill the void. Sandra's star rose too, her warmth and wit lighting up films like While You Were Sleeping and The Blind Side. She won an Oscar, and Keanu had watched from afar, his heart swelling with pride and breaking with longing. They'd see each other at premieres, award shows, always careful to keep their distance, their conversations polite but strained. She dated other men, high-profile actors, producers, but none lasted. Keanu's relationships were even briefer, each one crumbling under the weight of a truth he couldn't admit. No one could ever be Sandra. One memory stood out, a moment from 2000 when they'd crossed paths at a charity gala in Los Angeles. Sandra had been radiant in a sapphire gown, but her eyes were tired, shadowed. They'd stepped outside to escape the crowd, standing under a balcony as a light rain fell. "You okay, Sandy?" Keanu had asked, his voice soft. She'd smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just wondering what life would have been like if we'd been braver," she'd said, her words cutting him like glass. He'd wanted to tell her everything then, but Ellen Carter had appeared, pulling them back into the gala's chaos. Ellen had been their quiet ally, the one who'd seen their connection from the start. Later, over drinks, she'd warned Keanu, "You're both fools if you let this go. You don't get many chances like that." Keanu had nodded but did nothing, letting fear win again. Another moment haunted him. A late-night phone call in 2006, after Sandra's breakup with a high-profile actor. She called him at 2 a.m., her voice thick with tears. "Why does it always feel like something's missing, Keanu?" she'd asked. He'd wanted to say, "Because it's us, Sandy. We're what's missing." Instead, he'd offered platitudes, promising to visit soon. He never did, too afraid of what seeing her would unleash. Ellen had called him the next day, exasperated. "You're breaking her heart, Keanu. And your own. Stop hiding." But he couldn't stop, not then. Now, as he prepared for the CNN interview, those moments replayed like a film on loop. He thought of Ellen's words, of Sandra's wistful smile, of the house in New York he'd bought in 2010, the one with the garden she'd loved when they filmed a Target commercial together. It had been a spontaneous moment, walking past a brownstone with roses climbing its fence. That's my dream house, she'd said, her voice full of longing. A place to grow old, to be happy. Keanu had bought it years later, a silent promise to himself that one day he'd find the courage to ask her to share it. The house sat empty, a monument to his cowardice. The CNN studio was a cold, clinical space, its lights harsh against Keanu's weathered face. He greeted the crew with his usual warmth, shaking hands, learning names, but inside, he was unraveling. Vanessa Morrison waited, her smile sharp as a blade. "Keanu, thank you for being here," she said, her tone polished but predatory. "I know you value your privacy." "It's a pleasure, Vanessa," Keanu replied, settling into the chair. His fingers drummed nervously on his thigh, a childhood habit that surfaced in moments of stress. The cameras rolled and Vanessa pounced. "Keanu, you're Hollywood's kindest man, but there's a story you've kept from the world. A woman you've called a friend for decades, but who is so much more. Sandra Bullock. Care to tell us the truth?" The studio fell silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Keanu felt his throat tighten, as if the words he'd suppressed for decades were clawing their way out. "Sandra and we've always been close," he said, his voice measured. "She's an incredible person." Vanessa slid a photograph across the table, a candid from the speed set, Keanu's hand brushing Sandra's cheek, their eyes locked in a moment so intimate it was impossible to dismiss. "This isn't friendship, Keanu," Vanessa said, her voice sharp. "Crew members from Speed told us you two were inseparable off-camera. Jan de Bont said the chemistry was so intense he had to keep calling cut because you forgot you were acting. Ellen Carter said you'd disappear for hours, talking, laughing, like the world didn't exist. Why have you hidden this for 30 years? Keanu's heart pounded. He saw the beach again, Sandra's trembling voice, the moment he'd chosen cowardice over courage. "We were young," he said softly. "The industry was brutal. We thought we were protecting something, our careers, our friendship. But we were wrong." Vanessa leaned forward, sensing blood. "You were in love, Keanu. Both of you. And instead of fighting for it, you built this elaborate charade of friendship. It's tortured you, hasn't it? And Sandra, she never married, never had the family she dreamed of. Was she waiting for you?" The words cut deeper than Keanu expected. He thought of Sandra's smile at award shows, always tinged with a sadness he couldn't ignore. He thought of the nights he'd lain awake, imagining her life, wondering if she regretted their choice as much as he did. Vanessa pressed her advantage, pulling out a tablet and playing a clip from a recent talk show. Sandra, radiant but wistful, answered a question about love. "I'm waiting for someone who sees me, really sees me, without pretense." Keanu's vision blurred with tears. That was Sandra, always honest, always vulnerable, even in front of the world. And he'd let her wait, let her wonder, for 30 years. Something shifted inside him, a resolve born from decades of pain. He wiped his eyes and straightened, his voice steadying. "You're right, Vanessa. I was a coward. I've loved Sandra Bullock every single day since we met. Every role I played, every choice I made, was me trying to be the man she deserved." The studio was silent, the crew frozen, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Vanessa, caught off guard, tried to regain control. "So why not tell her? Why let 30 years pass?" Keanu looked directly into the camera, as if Sandra were the only person watching. "Because I was terrified. Terrified I wasn't enough, that I'd ruin the best thing in my life. That night on the beach, after the Speed rap party, she told me she was falling for me. And I lied. I said our friendship was too important to risk. But the truth is, I was already so in love with her it felt like my heart might explode." He reached into his leather jacket, pulling out an old flip phone, its screen cracked but functional. "This has one number, hers. For 15 years, I've kept it active. Every year, on the anniversary of Speed's release, we text. Just 2 words from her. Happy anniversary. And I reply, the best summer of my life." Vanessa's eyes widened, her carefully constructed narrative unraveling. Keanu pulled out a worn piece of paper, its edges frayed from years in his wallet. "This is what I wrote before Speed 2. I was going to tell her I couldn't do the sequel because I couldn't pretend anymore. I wanted us to be real." He unfolded it, his voice trembling as he read. "Sandy, I'm in love with you. Every scene we shoot feels like the truth, and it's killing me to act like it's not. I can't lose you, but I can't keep pretending either." The cameras zoomed in, capturing the faded handwriting, the raw honesty of words never sent. Keanu continued, tears streaming down his face. "I bought a house in New York in 2010, the one with the garden you loved when we filmed those Target commercials. You said it was your dream home. It's been empty for 13 years, waiting for the day I'd have the courage to ask you to live there with me." Across the country, Sandra watched from her living room in Austin, Texas, her phone slipping from her hands as tears blurred her vision. She remembered that house, the way they'd laughed and dreamed about a life simpler than Hollywood's glare. She remembered Ellen Carter's quiet encouragement, her knowing looks on the speed set. Ellen had stayed in touch over the years, always asking Sandra, "Have you talked to Keanu?" Really talked. Sandra had always deflected, too afraid to face the truth. Keanu's voice grew stronger, cutting through the studio's silence. "Sandy, I know you're watching. You always watch CNN after yoga. I've spent 30 years loving you from a distance, and I can't do it anymore. Every woman I dated, I was looking for you. Every relationship failed because they weren't you." He held up the flip phone, his hands shaking. "This is me finally making the call I should have made 30 years ago." He dialed, and the studio held its breath. In Sandra's home, her phone rang, the name Keanu glowing on the screen. She stared at it, 30 years of longing and regret crashing over her. On the fourth ring, she answered, her voice soft but steady. "Keanu?" "Sandy," he whispered, a smile breaking through his tears. "I'm so sorry. I love you. I always have. If there's any part of you that still feels what we did back then, please, give us a chance." The studio was silent, Vanessa speechless. Her ambush interview transformed into a love story for the ages. Sandra's voice came through the phone, trembling but clear. "Keanu, that night on the beach, I didn't say I was falling for you. I said I was already in love with you. I've been waiting for you to see me, really see me all this time." Keanu's face lit up, hope replacing decades of pain. "I see you, Sandy. I always have." In her living room, Sandra sobbed, clutching the phone. "Then come find me, Keanu. Don't wait another 30 years. The cameras kept rolling, capturing a moment that would echo across the world. Vanessa, her notes forgotten, sat back, realizing she'd witnessed something far greater than a scoop. But the story didn't end there. In the days that followed, the world was ablaze with the revelation. Social media erupted, fans dissecting every moment of Keanu and Sandra's public interactions over the years, piecing together a love story hidden in plain sight. Jan de Bont, now retired, gave a rare interview, confirming what he'd seen on the speed set. "They were magic," he said. "I told them both not to let it slip away, but Hollywood has a way of making you choose safety over love." Ellen Carter, now a documentary filmmaker, reached out to both Keanu and Sandra after the interview aired. She sent them a package, a collection of old photos from the speed set, moments they'd thought were private. One showed them sitting on the beach, Sandra's head resting on Keanu's shoulder, their faces lit by moonlight. A note from Ellen read, "You two were always meant to find your way back. Don't waste this chance." Sandra, overwhelmed by the public's response, retreated to her Austin home, where she spent hours rereading Keanu's unsent messages, forwarded to her by a CNN producer. Each one was a love letter, a chronicle of his longing, happy birthday wishes, notes about her films, confessions of how her smile still lit up his world. One message, dated 3 years earlier, read, "Sandy, I saw you on Ellen today. You're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I wish I'd been brave enough to tell you that in person." A week after the interview, Keanu flew to Austin. He stood outside her house, a modest ranch-style home surrounded by wildflowers, his heart pounding as he knocked. When Sandra opened the door, her eyes were red from crying, but her smile was the same one that had captured him 30 years ago. "You meant it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every word." "I did," Keanu said, stepping closer. "I'm done being afraid, Sandy. I want the life we should have had, the house, the garden, you." She laughed through her tears, pulling him into a hug that felt like coming home. "We've got a lot of time to make up for," she said. They spent the evening talking, not as Jack and Annie, not as Hollywood stars, but as Keanu and Sandra, two people who'd loved each other across decades of silence. They spoke of the diner, the beach, the house in New York. Sandra admitted she'd driven past it once, years ago, wondering why it felt so familiar. The world watched as their story unfolded. Paparazzi camped outside Sandra's home, but she and Keanu ignored them, choosing quiet moments over public spectacle. They visited the New York house together, standing in the overgrown garden as Sandra touched the roses, her eyes bright with possibility. "We could make this home," she said, and Keanu nodded, his hand finding hers. Ellen Carter visited them a month later, her eyes twinkling as she saw them together. I knew you'd find your way, she said, handing them a final gift, a short film she'd made, piecing together outtakes from Speed, their laughter and glances preserved forever. As they watched, Sandra leaned into Keanu, her head on his shoulder, just like that night on the beach. For Keanu and Sandra, the story wasn't over. It was a new beginning, a chance to rewrite the years lost to fear. The world would keep watching, but for the first time, they didn't care. They had each other, and that was enough.